everyone. My name is Pam Kringle, and I'm the librarian at T.R. Briggs High School here in Pierce, South Dakota. And today I want to share with you some information about book talking. Book talking is an activity that I have found has been, for me, one of the most successful ways to connect kids of all ages with books, particularly reluctant readers. Book talking is an awesome way to help spark that love of reading and a love of story in kids. I also find that book talking is a way to build a community of enthusiastic readers in your school. But before we get started talking today about book talking, I want you to think about the question that is on your screen now. What is your favorite story? I ask this because I think it is very important before we start talking about stories and books and about selling them to kids, that we reflect on the fact that we too are readers and that we have favorite books, and to recognize what those favorite books are. If we want to inspire our students to be readers, we must meditate on what inspires us to read. What was that story that hooked us and helped us to discover the magic of books? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds here to think about this. What is your favorite story? What is that story that speaks most to you? This is the part where I wish that we were live so that we could all share out our favorite stories. But I'm going to share mine with you today since we're not able to do this in real time. What my favorite story and my favorite book has been since I was 14 years old is this one, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. My mother gave it to me when I was in high school. At 14 years old, I was extremely awkward and very shy. High school was a rough time in my life. I felt very much alone and outside of the fun of high school that everyone else seemed to be experiencing. I just did not feel like I belonged. And my mother, I think, was able to recognize that loneliness on some level. My mother and I do not exchange or talk about emotions very often. My mother is the daughter of alcoholics, and so talking about emotions is very difficult for my mother to do. And that was hard for me because at 14, I was a very emotional teen, and I needed to vent to someone about my emotions, and my mother wasn't able to do that with me. But one of the things she did do is she could recognize that I was feeling lonely. And while she didn't know how to address it verbally with me, she did find this amazing book for me instead. A book that was written in 1965 by a 16-year-old girl in high school as a letter to her parents who did not understand the pain she was going through at that time. This book transformed my life, and I'm going to start by sharing with you a couple of pages from it, and then just telling you a little bit about it as an example of what a book talk can be. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only two things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. I was wishing I looked like Paul Newman. He looks tough and I don't. But I guess my own looks aren't so bad. I have light brown, almost red hair, and greenish gray eyes. I wish they were more gray, because I hate most guys that have green eyes, but I have to be content with what I have. My hair is longer than a lot of boys wear theirs, squared off in back and long at the front and sides. But I'm a greaser, and most of my neighborhood rarely bothers to get a haircut. Besides, I look better with long hair. I had a long walk home and no company, but I usually loan it anyway, for no reason except that I like to watch movies undisturbed, so that I can get into them and live them with the actors. When I see a movie with someone, it's kind of uncomfortable, like having someone read your book over your shoulder. I'm different that way. My second oldest brother, Soda, who is 16 going on 17, never cracks a book at all. And my oldest brother, Daryl, who we call Derry, works too hard and long to be interested in a story or drawing a picture. So I'm not like them. And nobody in our gang digs movies and books the way I do. For a while there, I thought I was the only person in the world that did, so I loaned it. Soda tries to understand at least, which is more than Derry does, but then Soda is different from anybody. He understands everything, almost. Like he's never hollering at me all the time the way Derry is, or treating me as if I was 6 instead of 14. I love Soda more than I've ever loved anyone, even Mom and Dad. He's always happy-go-lucky and grinning, while Derry's hard and firm and rarely grins at all. But then, Derry's gone through a lot in his 20 years, grown up too fast. Soda Pop will never grow up at all. I don't know which way is the best. I'll find out one of these days. Anyway, I went on walking home, thinking about the movie, and then suddenly wishing I had some company. Greasers can't walk alone too much or they'll get jumped, or someone will come by and scream greaser at them, which doesn't make you feel too hot if you know what I mean. We get jumped by the socias. I'm not sure how you spell it, but it's the abbreviation for the socials, the jet set, the West Side rich kids. It's like the term greaser, which is used to class all us boys on the east side. We're poorer than the socias and the middle class. I reckon we're wilder too. Not like the socias who jump greasers and wreck houses and throw beer blasts for kicks and get editorials in the paper for being a public disgrace one day and an asset to society the next. Greasers are almost like hoods. We steal things and drive old souped up cars and hold up gas stations and have a gang fight once in a while. I don't mean I do things like that. Derry would kill me if I got into trouble with the police. Since Mom and Dad were killed in an auto wreck, the three of us get to stay together only as long as we behave. So Soda and I stay out of trouble as much as we can, and we're careful not to get caught when we can't. I only mean that most greasers do things like that, just like we wear our hair long and dress in blue jeans and t-shirts, or leave our shirt tails out and wear leather jackets and tennis shoes or boots. I'm not saying that either socias or greasers are better. That's just the way things are. So begins the story of Ponyboy Curtis, a boy from the east side of the tracks, a so-called greaser who hangs with a fun-loving, wild, and tight crew. A crew that includes Ponyboy's two older brothers, handsome and charismatic Soda Pop, and responsible and protective Derry, rebel and loner Dallas Winston, practical joker Two-Bit Matthews, and sensitive, shy Johnny Cade, Ponyboy's best friend. Ponyboy is more than just his greaser label, though, as evidenced by his love for poetry and movies, and his openness to a friendship with a Soch girl named Cherry Valance, a friendship that does not sit well with the male Soches in town, who set out to terrify Ponyboy into leaving Cherry alone. In defense of Ponyboy's life during the rumble with the Soches, Johnny pulls a knife, and a Soch dies. Johnny and Ponyboy go on the run with Dallas's help, only they can't seem to escape the violence they hope to leave behind. First published in 1967, this novel has stood the test of time, becoming a beloved classic of teen literature and a favorite of many readers, including me. S.E. Hinton was 16 years old when she penned the story and 18 when it was published. If you have ever felt misunderstood, out of place, and alone, even when surrounded by others, then you'll find a true friend in Ponyboy Curtis. His story is one that will continue to haunt you long after you've turned the last page. The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton is not to be missed. So that was an example of a book talk. Book talks have a definite structure to them that we'll look at in a minute, but they always start with a hook of some kind. That can be sharing some of the text in order to put your listeners in the story, just as I did, or it can be starting with a personal story that connects your readers with you and the story itself, as I did when I related the story of how I first came to read The Outsiders. Book talking for me is a way to connect with kids and a way for them to connect with me in a personal way as a reader. As you can probably tell, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton is one of my favorite books, and it is one of the reasons I became a librarian. I work to help kids find that book or story that speaks to them, one that helps them learn that they are not alone and that they belong. Story is so powerful. It has the power to transform lives. Book talking is storytelling. Today, we are going to look at how to craft a powerful book talk so that we can help transform our students' lives through story. So what is book talking? Book talking is a book commercial. It is not a book report. When I do book talks, I don't use words like protagonist and antagonist and rising action or climax. I don't use those and other literary terms because that scares off some students, and it does not help forge that connection to the story itself that you are trying to sell. My book talks tend to be informal. Book talks are 2 to 3 minute book commercials. With a book talk, you're trying to sell the story, and you want to leave your readers wanting to know what happens. You know you've done a successful book talk when you get to the end and students are like, but I want to know what happens. And I always tell them, well, then you need to check out and read the book. I had one student one time ask me what happened at the end. And another kid who'd heard me book talk before turned to him and said, man, she ain't going to tell you. You got to check the book out. Book talks appeal to everybody. I do book talks with honors English students. I do book talks with our basic English students. I do book talks with ELL students. Book talking appeals to everybody across the board. Everybody loves to hear a story, and that's what book talking is, storytelling. You are giving your listeners 2 to 3 minutes of a book's plot, enough to get them hooked without giving them the ending. Jade Green, whose cover you see there on the slide, by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor, is the story of an orphan named Judith Sparrow. She has recently been orphaned, and her uncle Jeffrey offers to take her in and help her out. Judith is very grateful for this offer. Her uncle is a bachelor, and he is very eccentric. He lives by himself in his mansion house. His offer to Judith has one restriction, though. He tells her, you are welcome to live with me, Judith. I welcome you into my home, but you cannot bring anything green into my home. Well, Judith just thinks her uncle is very eccentric, but she says, all right, I'll honor your request. I am so grateful to you, Uncle Jeffrey, that I will get rid of everything green I own before I move into your home. Now, I always stop here in my book talk and ask my students if they could get rid of everything green that they own. For us, our school colors are green and white. So they all look at me with horror at this point. They cannot imagine getting rid of their green stuff. But Judith goes through her stuff and gets rid of all her green clothing. She gets rid of everything green that she owns, except for one thing. It's a green silk picture frame. It is a picture frame holding a picture of her and her recently departed mother. And it is the last gift her mother gave her before she passed on. Judith just cannot bear to part with it, so she vows that she will not display it at her uncle's home. She will honor the words of the vow she made to her uncle. She will not put this picture frame out in his view. She decides she's just going to wrap it up and keep it in her trunk. He will not even know I have it, she thinks. So she hides the picture frame, puts it in a trunk, and takes it into his home. She thinks everything is all good. But what Judith does not understand is that her uncle had a very good reason for telling her not to bring anything green into his home. Because by bringing that green picture frame into his home, Judith has awakened the ghost of a girl named Jade Green, a girl who wants revenge for her murder. Jade Green by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor is not to be missed, especially if you like thrillers that will keep you up at night. So you can see there we started with a hook and ended with a cliffhanger. The first step in book talking, and really the most important step in book talking, is determining which books you're going to talk about. You want to make sure that when you're preparing your list of books and when you're considering what books to include in your talk, that you consider your audience. Who is going to be in your audience? What reading levels and book formats do you need to have represented in your presentation? For example, if it is a class of reluctant or struggling readers, does your list include a variety of books with differing Lexile levels? Have you included some graphic novels along with traditional print texts? The lists I create for a 9th grade book talk differ vastly from the lists I create for a senior class book talk. Interests and concerns vary for those groups, and I want the books I talk about to reflect those interests. When developing your book talk list, you also need to consider what requirements does the teacher bringing the students in have for the lesson. For example, with my honors English book talks, the Riggs High honors teacher wants her students to have exposure only to books that are award winners. So when we're preparing her students' book talks, I must go through award-winning lists and select only those. However, Even with that instructional requirement, I still make sure to include a variety of genres in those award winners and formats in my talk for her students. It's also important to remember that in addition to considering who is in the class and what the teacher wants from the book talk, that you never forget that you never want to book talk a book you have never read in its entirety. You want to make sure that you are familiar with the entire story you're book talking. That is so you can speak about the story eloquently, and so your listeners know that you know the stories. Kids can quickly identify an inauthentic book talk, so be prepared and know your story. You also want to have read the whole book before talking about it so that you're not surprised by anything in the story. In addition to never book talking a book you have never read in its entirety, you never want to book talk a book that you do not like. Kids can tell you do not like a certain story, and that will dissuade them from reading it themselves. It may also be one of their favorite stories, and if they can tell you don't like it, then you can lose that connection to them as a reader. So in short, when preparing your book talk lists, be sure to include a variety of genres, formats, as well as books that you have read and enjoyed. I want to share with you a book that is on the slide right here. Jack Gantos is an award-winning author. Many of you, especially if you teach elementary and middle school, are familiar with his titles. He wrote a Newbery Award-winning book called Dead End in Norvelt, which is a very funny book. Jack Gantos is a very funny writer. He has also written several Newbery Honor books featuring Joey Pigza about a kid who has ADHD and who cannot control himself in the classroom. They're also very funny. Jack Gantos has also written a series of picture books called Rotten Ralph about a rotten cat. You can see that character up there in the image on the slide. What you may not know about Jack Gantos is that Jack Gantos, celebrated and award-winning children's author, is an ex-con. Oscar Wilde once said, "I have learned this. It's not what one does that is wrong, but what one becomes as a consequence." Do you think you can do something wrong and still turn it into a thing of beauty? Do you think your mistakes always have to define you? Can a person ever make a colossal mistake and yet ultimately be redeemed? In the summer of 1971, Jack Gantos was an aspiring writer looking for adventure, cash for college tuition, and a way out of a dead-end construction job. For $10,000, he recklessly agreed to help sail a 60-foot yacht loaded with a ton, or 2,000 pounds of hashish, from the U.S. Virgin Islands to New York City, where he and his partners then sold the drug on the streets until federal agents caught up with them. For his part in the conspiracy, Gantos was sentenced to serve up to 6 years in a medium-security prison in Ashland, Kentucky. Running just beneath the action of the story is how Gantos, once he was locked up in a small, yellow-walled cell, moved from wanting to be a writer to actually writing, and how dedicating himself more fully to the thing he most wanted to do, be a writer, helped him endure and ultimately overcome the worst experience of his life. Jack Gantos is now a Newbery Award-winning author with many books and series for young readers to his name. Hole in My Life, a memoir by Jack Gantos, is a testament to the idea that people can change and that we are more than just the sum total of our mistakes. I highly recommend reading Hole in My Life if you've never read it. One, because it's an amazing memoir. Even if Jack Gantos had never become a famous author, it would still be a great story of personal redemption. However, because he is such a famous author and is well known to librarians around the world, and he is well loved by students, it is really an interesting, eye-opening book to read. It makes his redemption that much more powerful since we know what comes after. The book is a young adult-oriented title because it does describe prison life graphically. When book talking, I always tell my students if there is something that they may find difficult or triggering, just so they know before reading. I encourage informed reading with eyes wide open always. That's especially important for our reluctant readers or kids or at-risk kids who may have triggering events in their lives. It's important that they know if there is triggering materials in a particular book that you are book talking or sharing with them. So where do you go to find books to book talk? If our first step in book talking is building a list, where do we go to find those sites or find those books? There are a lot of great places that I love to go to look for books, and one of my favorites is called Goodreads. Goodreads, if you're not familiar with this site, is a social media site where you can keep track of the books that you have read, where you can set a yearly reading challenge goal, and where you can connect with other readers to exchange book ideas. You need an account to do all of this. And I'm going to show you what Goodreads looks like right now. So this is the Goodreads site. I'm logged in as myself. I do have an account. And so you can see some friends down here, some titles that they've recommended. Over here, I haven't set my goal for 2021 yet, but I can do that. What I want to read, what I'm currently reading, what I've read. I have 44 books that I'm keeping track of that I read last year. So it was a good year for me for reading because we got a lot done. Okay. But even if you don't want to have an account at Goodreads, you can still use Goodreads. And Goodreads has a lot of value as a source of book talk, book ideas, as well as collection development. You can browse Goodreads by genre or by choice awards. And you can see the genres are over there listed on this drop-down menu. And you can also see this choice awards right here. The Choice Awards is a program that Goodreads has every year where the average everyday readers select their favorite books for the year. So let's go and take a look at the Choice Awards for 2020. What I love about these awards is that they are determined by everyday readers. Okay? They're not necessarily by award committee professionals. So you see books selected for Goodreads that may not be noticed by other awards. These are the 2020 Choice Awards that readers across the world have chosen as their favorite book. So for the fiction award winner for 2020 is Midnight Library. I can't wait to read this title. I've not had a chance to read it yet, but it's sitting on my desk right now at home. As you can see, Goodreads has awards for different genres, and every year they select new books in these different genres. You see their science fiction award this year went to Christopher Paolini's To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. This is really exciting because he is the author of Eragon. It's the first book he's published since that Eragon series several years ago, so it's pretty exciting to see that has won an award for this year. You can see we have biography there, we have science and technology, we have nonfiction, poetry, graphic novels, young adult fiction, young adult fantasy, middle grade, and children's, as well as picture books. And so if we go into picture books and look, there is a selection. Not only do you, when you click on that, do you see the award winner and they give you a description of it, but you see the other books it was up against for the year. So there's a lot of great selection there for you to take a look at and to use for collection development, like I said, or to build a book list. If you look over here on the side too, on the Choice Awards, once you go into one of the categories, you'll see the awards go back all the way to 2011. So, and if you click on 2011's awards, you can see the best book for favorite book of 2011 was Divergent. The science fiction award winner that year was Stephen King's time travel book about the assassination of JFK. There's a lot of really great books on here. And again, you get down here and you see young adult fantasy, middle grade and children's, picture books. Let's go look at middle grade and children's. There you see the titles that won that year in 2011. What's wonderful about this site, it's great for book talk ideas, and it's great for collection development ideas, both current and retroactive. So you could build a whole young adult fantasy book talk based on Goodreads Choice Awards. It's really kind of a fun idea. You could also set up your own Choice Awards for your school. Book talk, some books that you think are hot new books that you want your kids to have the opportunity to vote on, and then you could do your own in-school voting if you want to. Goodreads is just awesome. Another place that I encourage you highly to look at when looking for book talk, book ideas is the State Library's Book Award program. There is the Prairie Bud, Bloom, and Pask program for South Dakota students in grades pre-K through 5 to vote on. And then there is the YARP Awards, which are for South Dakota students in grades 6 through 12 to vote on. It is fun for students to read the books on the list and then have them vote for their favorite one. There's a new list every year. The winners are announced during National Library Book Week, or National Library Week in April, so that's always fun to promote that with. And you have all fall and winter for the kids to read from the lists. But in addition to having, let's just go in and take a look at the YARP list here for a minute. These lists are hosted because the program is hosted through the South Dakota State Library. They have a link on the State Library page. This is the YARP Award for our students in grades 6 through 12. But not only do they have the current lists, but I want you to notice that they also do have back lists that give you titles that have won in the past. So if I look down here on the YARP page, here's a link that says past YARP winners. And if I click on that, it's going to take me to this page right here, which shows me the winners all the way back down here to 2008, 2009. But I want you to notice this little button here. It says YARP nominees dating back to 1989. This takes you to Goodreads Choice Awards page, which is pretty awesome because we just talked about Goodreads. These are titles that were part of the YARP program back many, many years ago, and they are some of my favorite titles. So make sure you take a look at some of these past winners too, or past nominees. They didn't always have winners. YARP used to just be a recommended reading list, not necessarily a voting program, and so some of these were just on the recommended reading list, but some of the titles in here are great. So they are for teens and young adults, and there's adult materials on here as well as teen materials, but be sure to check them out because some of these older ones are just pretty awesome as well. The Prairie Pask, Prairie Bud, and Prairie Bloom for our elementary students, they also have past award winners. The Prairie Bud, Pask, and Bloom program used to be a Prairie Pask program, and those winners go back to 1987. So if we go down here and look at this link that says Winners Bookshelf and kind of scroll down here, here are your past winners all the way back. We keep going all the way back to 1987, which 86, 87, my favorite book, my Prairie Pask, Night of the Twisters, which is about what happened at Grand Island, Nebraska when 7 tornadoes hit the same town in one night. I always used to do that when I taught in the middle school as a librarian. With my kids in 6th grade, I would read them that story out loud, and we'd talk about the Prairie Pask program. But we'd also then do some research on the real event, and we would compare the real event to how it was presented in fiction, that same by Ivy Ruckman, so that kids could see that comparison between what truly happened and how it was depicted in fiction. But this is a great list to use. Highly recommend taking a look at those as well. So those are our YARP and Prairie Pask programs, or our South Dakota Children's Choice Awards. Really a fun place to go to get some book talk ideas. Another great resource for book titles, for book lists, and book talking is the American Library Association Book Awards. This second link that I have here in my presentation will take you to the American Library Association to an exhaustive list that shows all of the awards that the American Library Association offers. This is for children, teens, adults. Some of them are financial scholarship awards, so you kind of have to be careful about how you're looking through these. But I wanted to make sure you had a link to all of these awards. And here's one that I want to call your attention to if you're not familiar with it, the Alex Awards. Of course, it's not working right now. The Alex Awards is an award given by the American Library Association to books that are written for adults that have young adult appeal. And so I want you to just kind of keep an idea or keep that one in mind. Take a look at the list. Hopefully it'll be working for you when you go in to look at it. And get some ideas for some books for your teens, of adult books that may be a little bit higher reading level that still have that teen appeal. Another way to find books for book talks is to ask colleagues or students for suggestions of good books. If you want to build a community of readers, this is a great way to do so. Start a dialogue about books with your fellow staff members and your students. Catch them reading and ask them about what they're reading. I've learned about so many good genre books this way. I'm not particularly a science fiction reader, but I have discovered that my biology teacher is. He absolutely loves it, and so he's always asking me for different authors, and he exposed me to Amy Kaufman's book series called The Illuminae Files, and I absolutely loved it, and I've been able to sell that one after reading it after his suggestion to a lot of my students here at Riggs. So that's really fun. And it's not, you don't typically think the biology teacher would love reading, but he really does, and he's shared that with me. So make sure that you seek out all of your teachers, not just your English teachers. And one of the final ways to discover books for book talks is to browse bookstore and library shelves, even your own. One of my favorite topics for book talks is to showcase books that are not circulating on my shelf. So I'll pull those and I'll highlight them, and they're maybe not circulating because of covers or because kids just haven't found them yet on my shelf. So I'll pull them and I'll book talk them, and it's fun to see them circulate. One of the virtual public library shelves that I love to view is the Hennepin County Library. It's bookshelves in Minnesota, Hennepin County Libraries in Minnesota. And they have an awesome library website. They have created already kid and teen book lists that you can browse. And to get to these lists that they've created, click on the link here, which says Browse. And from there, you can select to browse for teens, children, or preschoolers. And within that browse feature, you can select different genre or thematic lists. So let's go down and look at books for children. And you can see the different categories they've selected for you. So let's say I want some mystery and adventure stories. So they're going to highlight some of their current mystery and adventure stories that you want to take a look at right there. They have up here too, you can see select lists. They have an adventure list for kids and they have a mystery for kids. So I'm going to take a look at their mystery list. And I can click here to view more if I want to. And here is a mystery list that they have created for us to take a look at. And I can look at all those. You can see they're all checked out because they say placehold, but gives you some ideas of some cool new titles. Like I said, this is a great way too to build collection development. If you don't have some of those titles, you might want to add them. So, and they're always changing them. So be sure to take a look at some of these lists. The other site that I love to browse the shelves electronically of is Barnes & Noble. Oops, excuse me just a second. I get back into my slide here. The site from Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble is our state's largest bookstore, and it's located in Sioux Falls. I love Barnes & Noble's, but unfortunately, I live 3.5 hours from it. So to go and physically browse their shelves is not really a possibility for me on a regular basis. However, Barnes & Noble operates an awesome website where you can find great book titles for book talks and for collection development. So if we look here, you can see the different audience categories they have. So if I go up here to teens and young adults, because that's the audience that I serve here in my school, I see here subjects. So I can go down here to romance, take a look at it. I've got 6,257 titles here, and I can start browsing those for some ideas of things to see. And this is a great way to find out about new books because some bookstores get them faster than we do sometimes. So it's kind of nice to see that. I have provided links for all of these sites that I just talked about in my presentation. So you can come here and take a look at it. And you are welcome to link to any of those or use any of those on your own in your own library. If you have other sites that you like to use for book ideas or for browsing, let me know, and we can add them to this Google Slide presentation, making it a living document. So I'm always looking for suggestions. So just email me or let me know, send me a message with an idea of a website that you really like to use for books ideas for book talks. Okay, you've determined what books you're going to book talk. The next step in the book talking process is to prepare and practice your book talks. Book talking is a storytelling experience, and you don't want to derail that experience for your audience by forgetting the name of a character or the name of the story's location. So it is important when prepping your book talks to take notes on important details. In addition to note taking, you also want to give your students a visual to look at while you're talking. So I usually create a PowerPoint with the book's covers to entice readers and accompany my book talk. Or instead of a PowerPoint, you could gather the books from your shelves and put them in a face-out display for students to see. You want to practice your book talk beforehand, though, because you want your book talks to be smooth. Book talking is a performance. It is a storytelling performance, and you need to develop your own style. If you're comfortable with props, then by all means use them. My style is more organic and scripted. I'm not a dramatic storyteller. Just remember, though, that an organic, heartfelt testimonial for a book works just as well as a dramatic reading. Your book talk just needs to be authentic to who you are for it to work. Kids respond to book talks and more traditional lessons, for that matter, that come from the heart and demonstrate that you like the story and that you care about the kids and the books you're talking about. If you set that compassionate and respectful tone with your book talk, then those books will fly off the shelf. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the structure of a book talk. I'm going to cover the structure using a book talk on a book called Escaping the Giant Wave by Peg Carrot. Book talks always start with a hook of some kind to get your listeners' interest piqued. One of the best ways I have found to start book talks is by asking my listeners a question. So here's how I would book talk Escaping the Giant Wave by Peg Carrot. How many of you have ever flown in an airplane before? That experience of soaring above the clouds and looking down on a miniature world is exhilarating. I hope that you all get to have that amazing experience someday. In Escaping the Giant Wave, we meet two kids, Kyle and his little sister Bibi, who are enthusiastic and ecstatic to be experiencing their first flight and their first travel out of state, thanks to their dad, who's won an all-expenses-paid trip for the family to travel to Oregon. While there, their dad will be collecting a Salesman of the Year award for his work selling insurance. The flight from Ohio is a blast for the kids, and the Oregon coast is breathtaking. Kyle and Bibi are having a ball, splashing in the waves and running through the sand. On the night of the awards banquet, Kyle's parents leave to board a chartered company boat and leave Kyle in charge of Bibi in the hotel room. Kyle is okay with that, since the kids are allowed to select a movie to watch and get to order a pizza and milkshakes from room service for dinner. As they start eating, though, a rumbling noise begins and the room starts to shake violently. An earthquake has struck. However, the danger is just beginning for the duo, as the earthquake ruptures a gas line and the hotel they're in catches on fire. Escaping the fire, they reach the outside only to realize that they are in even more danger there than they were in the hotel room. If you live on the coast, what is the one thing that you need to worry about happening after an earthquake? That's right. Earthquakes can sometimes trigger a tsunami wave. In fact, this earthquake has triggered a gigantic wave 40 feet tall out at sea that is coming for them both. Suddenly, the perfect vacation has turned into a nightmare. Will Kyle and Bibi survive the night? If they do, how will they find their parents again? Did their parents even survive? Disaster and a heart-pounding action await anyone brave enough to read Escaping the Giant Wave by Peg Carrot. In addition to a hook, all book talks need to have a summary identifying the characters, conflict, and tone of the story. So my hook in that last book talk I did for you was to ask kids, or ask you, my listeners, how many of you have ever flown on an airplane before? Hoping to trigger that experience in their mind. And then I led into how Kyle and Bibi were taking their first trip out of state to visit the coast. When you're summarizing, you want to make sure that you don't give the ending away. You want to give them enough information about the characters, conflict, and tone so that they know what the story is about. But you don't want to tell them the ending, because why do they want to check it out if they know the ending? Okay. You want your readers to read the book. If you tell them the ending, there's no need for them to read it. You also want to include, after you've given your summary and your opinion about the book, what'd you like? What do you think they will like? Then you want to make sure to end your book talk with a cliffhanger. In this questions, in the example I gave you, I left you with a question. Will they survive? Will the parents even survive? How are they going to make it through the night? So I think that's one of the most effective ways to end a book talk, and it works especially well for mysteries and for adventure stories. Leave them with a question or with a quote that really stands out. So that these 4 items here, the hook, the summary, the likes, and the cliffhanger, is a basic structure of what a book talk looks like. It's up to you then to script your book talk and make it your own. At the bottom of the cliffhanger slide here, there is, and you're not able to see it right now because this is covering it. I apologize. This audio program that I'm using is covering it. But there is a link there for you that is of a woman demonstrating how not to do a book talk first, and then how to give a great one. This video is a lot of fun for students to watch, and I encourage you to view it. I love pausing the video when I show it with students and asking them, okay, now, what do we not want to do during a book talk? I still remember one student who looked at me with a smile and said, not act like teenagers. I had to laugh. So when you go into the presentation, you have the Google Slides linked for you on the Google Classroom. You can see that link to that YouTube video, and you can watch that video. That woman doing that she's very funny. And it's a great thing to show. I teach my students, not only do I book talk with my students, but I teach my students how to book talk. And we cover the structure and how you don't want to give away the ending. And it's a 2 to 3 minute commercial. I go through all of that with them. And I show them this video showing this lady how not to give a book talk and then how to give a book talk. And it really is fun. So why do you want a book talk? Book talking gives the book talker credibility and helps build rapport with users, staff, and students alike. I often do book talk sessions for adults at Pierre Public School District in-services, and those sessions are far and away the most heavily attended of all the in-service sessions I do, and not just by my English staff. One of my favorite questions to get at the end of a book talk is, have you read every book in the library? A successful book talker is one who looks like she or he holds the knowledge about every book in their library. Book talking is also, and not only a great PR technique for the library, but it's also an active promotion of your library's reading materials versus more traditional passive techniques, such as static book displays. Now, do not get me wrong. Book displays are important and can be very enticing if done right. One of my favorite displays is to wrap books in newspapers and put them on a table for students to choose as a blind date. But book displays are not going to attract as much attention as book talking does. As my honors English teacher told me, anything you talk about, they're going to want to read. If you've not book talked it, they're not interested in it. For some kids, I want you to think about this right now for a minute. For some kids, the library can be a very overwhelming place. There are books everywhere, and the covers usually are not facing out in a traditional library. In my library, my shelves are pretty full, which can be off-putting to some students, especially for reluctant readers. But if you stand there and sell them on a select set of books, it makes those books come to life. It makes them powerful and interesting. Book talking appeals to everyone, but especially those non-traditional library users. The ones that are not as comfortable coming into your room because they are overwhelmed by all the resources there. Book talking makes the library smaller and more accessible to them. One of the most powerful mysteries I have read recently is an Edgar Award winner titled Sadie, written by Courtney Summers. The story begins with the brutal murder of a 13-year-old girl named Maddie in a small Colorado town, which is on the brink of collapse and decay. Sadie, Maddie's older 19-year-old sister, is devastated by her younger sister's death and infuriated by the inept and apathetic police investigation which follows. Sadie decides she knows who Maddie's killer is, a creepy pedophile who was her mother's latest ex-boyfriend, and she sets out to find him and exact revenge. Sadie then promptly disappears herself. While we are hearing Sadie's story, we are also introduced to Wes McCrae, a podcast celebrity who is creating a podcast on America's forgotten communities. As part of the podcast, he travels to Sadie's depressed hometown and, while interviewing its residents, comes across Sadie and Maddie's stories in the process. Wes becomes obsessed with finding Sadie, and he sets out to trace her path. As he is about to find out, though, some people really do vanish into thin air. Sadie is a mystery that will have you on the edge of your seat from the first page to the last. Book talking really does work. I just wanted to show you a picture from Riggs's homecoming in 2019. That morning, I had done a book talk with my honors English students on award winners. At the end of the talk, the students all had books that they wanted to check out. I said, well, to be fair to everyone and to all the classes that are coming in, you need to wait and come after school, and then it's on a first-come, first-served basis. I had the books gathered, and after school that day, there was a line of students outside my door to get in and check out the book they wanted. Now, mind you, this was a half day where students were free to leave early, but many stuck around to get the book they wanted. If you have never book talked before, I encourage you to give it a try. As I said, you don't have to be an accomplished storyteller or actor. You just need to have a love of kids and books and a passion for connecting the two. Book talking really does work, and this picture is testament to that. Another program that I found has worked a lot to get kids interested in books is called First Lines. My English teachers especially enjoy this activity because it gets kids thinking about the power of an opening sentence and deliberate word choice. We talk about how important it is to think carefully and deliberately about what you're trying to say when you write. You can try this activity with any class, though. I find it works really well with nonfiction as well as fiction. The activity involves you simply finding the first lines of the books you want to talk about and putting those first lines and the corresponding book jackets up on a slide. Students then try to match up the titles with their first line. It is a great activity to help students develop their inference skills too. So we're going to sample this activity right now. I'm going to read the first lines to you of the 6 titles pictured up there, and I want you to deduce which titles you think go with which of the lines. So the 6 lines we have are: the human head is the same approximate size and weight as a roaster chicken. That was sentence number 1. Sentence number 2. There is a photo on my wall of a woman I've never met. Its left corner torn and patched together with tape. Number 3. One moment. That's all it takes for your entire world to split apart. 4. On an island off the southern coast of New Jersey, at the edge of the vast and desolate pine lands, stood an old, proud wooden hotel. 5. I could not have my mother come to my funeral. 6. The first time Daddy found out about me, it was from behind glass during a routine visit to prison, when Ma lifted her shirt, teary-eyed, exposing her pregnant belly for emphasis. So again, line number 1. The human head is the same approximate size and weight as a roaster chicken. So which book cover up there do you think that first line comes from? Do you think it's Not Without Hope, Stiff, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, Breaking Night, In the Country We Love, or Close to Shore? Well, the first sentence, the human head is the same approximate size and weight as a roaster chicken, comes from Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers by Marius Roach. It is a riveting look at what happens to human bodies that are donated to science after death. Sure, some find their way to anatomy classrooms around the country where aspiring medical students study them. But as Mary Roach uncovered, many others are used in rather unconventional, surprising, and at times gruesome ways. She witnesses the use of human heads, unencumbered by their torsos, being used for surgical practice by plastic surgeons brushing up on new medical techniques. She interviews criminology professors, law enforcement personnel, who use donated bodies to determine decomposition rates by burying said donated bodies in the ground and then going back and digging them up weeks and even months later to see what has happened to them. These same bodies are also used for training cadaver dogs. Donated bodies have been used in automobile crash test experiments, as well as airline disaster research, and as museum exhibits on the human body. Mary Roach exposes body donation with raw respect and a keen sense of humor. Included in the text is some interesting information on the history of body snatching by medical doctors in the 18th and 19th centuries. Doctors who were so desperate for human cadavers to use in research that they would sneak into cemeteries under the cover of darkness to dig up freshly buried bodies. So desperate were these medical doctors and schools for bodies, Mary Roach tells us that one 18th century Scottish medical school allowed its students to pay their tuition in corpses rather than cash. Stiff is a fascinating read, sure to enlighten and entertain anyone looking for an unusual scientific read. Who said science is boring? Also, for the second line, there is a photo on my wall of a woman I've never met, its left corner torn and patched together with tape. Which one do you think that comes from? And that actually comes from the book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. It is part biography, part treatises on medical ethics, and part history lesson. It is a nonfiction book that reads like fiction. Henrietta Lacks was a young 31-year-old African-American mother of 5 who sought treatment for her late-stage cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins University in 1951. During the course of her treatment and without her consent, cells were harvested from the tumor in her cervix and used by doctors to grow a culture of cells that could be used in research. Expecting failure, as doctors worldwide had been unsuccessful in the past growing cells for use in the laboratory, doctors were astonished to see Henrietta's cells grow and quickly multiply. The cell line was harvested and became known as the HeLa cell line for Henrietta Lacks. These cells can be found in laboratory freezers and are used in scientific research all over the world today. HeLa cells have been used in developing the polio vaccine, chemotherapy, in vitro fertilization, and gene mapping, to name a few. Yet very few people know who the woman behind the HeLa cells was or what happened to her. This book explores who Henrietta Lacks was and how she may unwittingly be the most famous unknown name in science today. Line number 3. One moment, that's all it takes for your entire world to split apart. That comes from the book In the Country We Love. When Diane Guerrero, star of the TV show Orange is the New Black, was 14 years old, she landed a solo in the spring musical at her Boston Performing Arts High School. Excited to share the information with her mother, Diane practically sprinted home, only to find an empty house. For that morning, while Diane had been at school, her parents, undocumented immigrants from Colombia, had been arrested and were soon deported, leaving Diane, an American-born citizen, all alone and adrift without her familial support system. Seeking shelter with a family friend, Diane put herself through high school and college, while her relationship with her parents grew more and more fractured and distant. In the Country We Love is Diane Guerrero's memoir of that lonely and confusing time in her life when nothing made sense and she was forced to grow up fast and find her own way in the world with little support. It is, unfortunately, the all-too-common story for many American-born children of illegal immigrants. It is the book, Diane said, that I wish I could have read when I was a girl. First line number 4. On an island off the southern coast of New Jersey, at the edge of the vast and desolate pinelands, stood an old, proud wooden hotel. And that first line comes from the book Close to Shore. In the summer of 1916, ocean swimming was a relatively new form of entertainment, a pastime whose popularity was about to be seriously challenged by the actions of a rogue great white shark. A juvenile male shark who, in the span of 2 weeks' time in early July 1916, attacked 5 swimmers along the New Jersey coast, killing 4 of them. 2 of the victims were even attacked and killed 11 miles from the ocean in a New Jersey creek. These attacks were the first known shark-on-human attacks, and they sparked America's enduring fear of sharks. Indeed, the actions of this rogue shark from 1916 became the basis for Peter Benchley's novel Jaws. Close to Shore by Michael Capuzzo is a non-fiction scientific thriller that will have you in its grips from page 1. First line number 5. I could not have my mother come to my funeral. That comes from the book Not Without Hope by Nick Schuler. Personal trainer and former University of South Florida football star Nick Schuler was looking forward to February 28, 2009. It was the day he planned to go deep-sea fishing for amberjack off the Clearwater, Florida coast with his clients and NFL superstars Marquis Cooper and Corey Smith. Marquis, the ship captain, had invited Corey, Nick, and Nick's best friend and former USF football teammate William Bleakley to spend the beautiful spring day together shooting the breeze and catching big fish. 70 miles from the coast, the once serene day started to get dicey as rough water rose and a storm came up. Deciding to head for shore and call it a day, Marquis attempted to pull up the anchor only to discover that it was caught on a coral reef. Not wanting to cut the anchor line, Marquis capsized the boat in his attempt to free it from the reef, sending all 4 men into the water. Holding on to the boat, the men attempted to keep each other's spirits up, telling jokes and reciting prayers as the hours passed. After several hours in the water, though, hypothermia and delirium set in, and one by one, Nick watched his friends let go of the boat and slip into the water, until only he remained, clinging desperately to the lifeless ship. When he was eventually discovered by the Coast Guard after 43 hours in the water, Nick's body temperature was 88.8 degrees, and he himself was close to unconsciousness. Not Without Hope is Nick Schuler's stunning story of survival and his tribute to the men who were lost on that fateful fishing trip. It is not a book without controversy, though, as many of the victims' relatives accuse Nick of fabricating details of the ordeal to garner media attention and of not giving them straight answers as to what really happened to their loved ones. The last line, then, the first time Daddy found out about me, it was from behind glass during a routine visit to prison when Ma lifted her shirt, teary-eyed, exposing her pregnant belly for emphasis, comes from the only book we have left, called Breaking Night. Liz Murray was born in New York to drug-addicted parents in the early 1980s. As a young girl, she often watched her mother and father mainline cocaine on the kitchen table and frequently went hungry as her parents used any money they had on drugs. At age 15 years old, Liz's mother died of AIDS, and Liz found herself homeless and eating out of garbage cans. Determined to not follow her parents' path, Liz focused on finishing high school any way she could, which included doing homework on subway trains and crashing on friends' and acquaintances' couches when she could. Despite the rough time, Liz graduated high school and won a full-ride scholarship to Harvard University from the New York Times. Breaking Night is Liz Murray's inspiring and Alex Award-winning memoir of her childhood and teenage years going from homeless to Harvard. All of those books that I just book talked were nonfiction, and all of them would make great short book talks to use with other lessons that you are doing for teachers. I think it is fun to look at using nonfiction for book talking, especially if you're thinking about incorporating a talk with teachers that would not normally think of having a book talk in their class, such as a science class or a history class. I think of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks or Stiff, and being able to do it, or even Close to Shore, doing a quick book talk on one of those 3 titles or any other science books that you like to a class that's coming in for research. class or unit, being able to do just a quick book talk before you start your research class. Yeah, so like maybe if one of those classes came in for a research lesson, you could interject a quick little book talk for those students on a themed nonfiction title before you start your research lesson. What a great idea. What a way to incorporate books into a more traditional research lesson. Another activity that I found that's been very successful for connecting kids with books, besides book talking, is something called speed dating, book speed dating, or book tastings. I've seen this activity referred to as both things. Personally, I call it book speed dating, and it's just a great way to introduce kids to books in a somewhat more of a passive way than book talking. Because in book talking, in book speed dating, you're not standing up there book talking, but rather you're giving the kids the opportunity to explore the chosen titles on their own. Book speed dating allows you to expose kids to more books than you can through book talking. When you book talk, I find that you can share about 20 to 22 books in a 45-minute period. I find if I do any more than that, students' eyes tend to glaze over. It's a bit too much storytelling. With book speed dating, you have an opportunity to set books out on tables for kids to look at for a certain amount of time, and then they move on to the next table to look at more books. So book speed dating is a form of programming where readers are given multiple rounds of 5-minute sessions to explore and delve into a variety of reading materials. You can arrange those materials just like you would a book talk around, say, a certain theme, genre, or Dewey number. Me, I tend to be a little more lax with the topics, and I just pile books on tables when I do book speed dating. I'll go through my shelves and I'll choose books maybe that haven't circulated in a while or books I know are awesome. I just pile books on tables, huge stacks of them in all different types of genres, all different types of formats. In my room, I have 10 round tables, and I pile a stack of books on each of those 10 round tables. The kids come in, they sit down at a table. Then they have 5 minutes at that table to read and browse through the books. I set up a timer. After that 5 minutes, they rotate to the next table where they have a chance to look at some new books. So here is my instructions that I give the students about their timeline for each table. So the first 2 minutes are the time when they're looking through the books at the table, and they're going to look at the front and back covers. They're going to read the blurbs, check out the size of the text print, the white space, illustrations, and they're going to start reading. When we get to minute 3 of those 5 minutes, then that's when they start reading. And I tell them that's when they're date committed, that they're not going to change their book out between this 3 to 5 minutes, because they're going to start reading from that first chapter and they're going to get into it. At the end of 5 minutes, the bell goes off and they get up and change tables. I also give them these instructions. So I give them the instructions on the time and what they're going to do in those 5 minutes at their table. Then I give them the do's and don'ts of speed dating. Once we reach that 3-minute mark, that's when they are going to focus on the date they've chosen or the book that they've chosen. They're not going to go back to the pile and change that book out. They're committed to that book for 3 minutes. If they don't find a match, that's okay. When they get to the next table, they can keep looking, okay? And even if they don't find one there or any of the tables they rotate to, they always have time at the end to go to the shelves if there's something they had in mind that they want to get. If they find a book they like at a table, they can keep it and take it with them to the next table. But I do tell them that when they get to the next table, they need to look at the books that are on the next table because they may find one they like even better, okay? And I do tell them once they start the 3 minutes of reading time, we're not changing books, we're not trying to read someone else's book, and we're not distracting others. I tell them that I can't read if people are talking, so there's absolute silence between that 3 and 5 minutes. And it really is fun to watch kids get into it and get into the reading process of it. They really, really do like that. Just as when you're preparing your book talk list, where you want to make sure to include a variety of genres and formats, you want to do the same at each one of the tables with the books you select. Have those graphic novels on there, have that nonfiction, have those biographies, but also include the fiction in the mystery, science fiction, horror. Have all of those different books represented at the tables. Now, you could do each table in a different genre, different category. You could have a table of all nonfiction. I like to put all of them together and kind of give the kids exposure to them, because they're not going to be able to rotate to all of the tables in that class period. So I like them to have exposure to all those types of genres and formats on one table, and then go to the next table and have that exposure again. Book speed dating is a fun way to expose students to genres they may not think they may be interested in. I had one student this year, a freshman student, who ended up finding the book Selection by Kiera Cass, the Selection series, which, if you want a short book talk on that, is The Hunger Games meets The Bachelors. Bachelor meets The Hunger Games. And she said, Mrs. Kringle, I never would have chosen a book like this, but I really, really like it. And she would not have been, if I had just done a book talk on the Selection, she may have heard the fact that it was a Hunger Games type dystopian story, and she'd never read one of those. So she may have thought, well, I'm not going to be interested in that. But because she actually was exposed to it and forced, quote unquote, to read it for 3 minutes, it really hooked her attention. The text itself really hooked her attention. My student ended up selecting or checking out all the rest of that series too. So that was really fun. Having students actually getting in there and reading a book for a few minutes really gives them an idea of what type of book they do and do not like. I always tell students, though, that if they don't find that match, to keep looking, and that they will have time at the end to check out from the whole library. Sometimes I do have students that do not find something they like on the tables, and that's okay. They have an opportunity at the end to go to the shelves. I have found this to be a very successful activity, though, and one that all students tend to love to do. The main bulk of the work on your end is pulling the books to put on the tables and then reshelving those that do not get checked out. So book speed dating is a low stress activity that yields impressive results in terms of circulation. Another thing that I wanted to share with you today is the use of picture books, and how picture books can be used just like book talks to inspire kids to get excited about lessons, or to inspire kids to get excited about books and readings. I love this quote. It says, "Good stories surprise us. They make us think and feel. They stick in our minds and help us remember ideas and concepts in a way that a PowerPoint crammed with bar graphs never can." And that's a quote from Joe Lasukis and Shane Snow from The Storytelling Edge. I just love that quote. I love the idea that stories really make lessons come alive. And that can either be done through book talking, through book speed dating, or it can be done through sharing a picture book. Sharing a picture book with your students has value, not only for our elementary school students, but for our middle and high school students as well. They are an awesome way to scaffold lessons and help kids connect with background knowledge that they may or may not have. Picture books make great interest-enhancing anticipatory set activities. While important for all students to experience, they are especially effective to use with our ELL, our struggling readers, and our visual learners. Sharing a picture book is another form of storytelling, where we're using the story as a vehicle to make sense of the world. So says Jim Trelease, an educator who wrote a very informative book called The Read Aloud Handbook. What he had to say is that story is the vehicle we use to make sense out of the world, even when we sleep. It is the story that focuses our attention and helps us make sense out of the world around us. Jim Trelease, as I said, is the author of the Read Aloud Handbook, which is a great resource for parents and for teachers that talks about the power of reading aloud to children. In his book, he presents research about why the reading aloud process should not stop for our students as they grow into teenagers. The book also contains lists of titles that are great for kids of all ages to hear read aloud. Pictured on this slide are two of my favorite books by one of my favorite South Dakota authors/illustrators, S.D. Nelson. Crazy Horse's Vision is written by Joseph Bruchac, but is illustrated by S.D. Nelson, while Sitting Bull, Lakota warrior and defender of his people, is written and illustrated by S.D. Nelson alone. S.D. Nelson, if you do not know who he is a member of the Standing Rock tribe. He is a renowned artist who uses his native heritage to inform his artwork. He uses a lot of ledger-style art in his books. He also uses colors in his artwork that are significant to the Lakota people within their cultural tradition. In the end of the Crazy Horse's Vision, in an artist's note, he explains that he paints Crazy Horse blue because the color blue has significance to Lakota people as being associated with the spirit world. and Crazy Horse had a close connection with the spirit world. I highly encourage you to take a look at his books and use them as a springboard for your students to learn about Lakota culture, important South Dakota figures, and Native artistic styles. My art teacher loves to use his books when discussing ledger-style art. Picture books are an awesome way to introduce students to the people and events of history in a personal and succinct way. They make textbook history lessons come to life. And what I really appreciate about picture books dealing with historical topics is that many of them are authored and illustrated by people of color, whose voices are often underrepresented or not represented at all in traditional discussions of history. Picture books about history are especially useful to use with our ELL students, many of whom lack background knowledge about American history. Picture books are an effective way to build that knowledge quickly. Since they are in story form, they are also more likely to absorb and remember those lessons as well. Going Someplace Special by Patricia McKissack is one of my favorites to use with students to teach about the Jim Crow South. If you have never read it and you are a librarian, you need to give yourself a gift and read it. This is a true story from author Patricia McKissack's life growing up African American in Nashville, Tennessee in the 1950s. As a teen, she wanted to go someplace special on her own. Her grandmother, with some trepidation, agrees to let her go. McKissack chronicles her journey to someplace special and her frustration of not being able to ride in the front of the crowded bus, not being able to sit on certain benches in the park because they were for whites only, as well as her fear when she gets swept up into a mob and deposited in a hotel lobby where she is yelled at by management for daring to be there. Despite all the troubles, though, Trisha Ann is not dissuaded from her journey and finally makes it to someplace special, which it turns out is the Nashville Public Library. During the 1950s, the Nashville Public Library Board made the bold and courageous decision to fully integrate their whole facility for use by all. This picture book is a powerful story that brings the Jim Crow time period to life in a way textbooks cannot. Picture books are also a great tool to spark creative writing. I want to call your attention to this book, The Mysteries of Harris Burdick by Chris Van Allsburg, who is best known as the author of Jumanji. The Mysteries is a collection of stunning black and white illustrations accompanied by a single sentence description for each. Here's an example of one of the illustrations, the house on Maple Street. It was a perfect liftoff. Supposedly, Harris Burdick created these images and then entrusted them to the narrator before disappearing. The dreamy and surreal tone of the illustrations and the single sentence description invites readers to create their own stories about what is happening in the illustrated scenes. My art teacher loves to use this book with her students. She has them view the illustrations without the descriptive sentences and then has them create their own captions. She does this lesson as a precursor to having her students create captions for their own works of art. Your English teachers might like to use Mysteries book as a springboard for having students create their own creative writing pieces describing the illustrations. This has been done at a professional level through the book, The Chronicles of Harris Burdick, which is a collection of short stories written by very famous authors for children, teens, and adults, using the Mysteries illustrations as the inspiration. It is not to be missed. Stephen King's short story about aliens and the house on Maple Street is especially fun. Picture books also are great to use for short character development lessons. One of my favorites to use for that purpose is A Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. This 224-word picture book contains a story that is more than meets the eye. Yes, it is a sweet story about a little caterpillar who grows up to transform into a beautiful butterfly. But it is also the story of Eric Carle's triumph over a childhood filled with war and fear. Eric Carle was born in Syracuse, New York, to German immigrant parents. After finishing kindergarten in 1935, his mother, who was homesick, moved the family back to Stuttgart, Germany. Eric Carle was 6 years old at the time. Eric Carle was living in Germany then when Hitler and the Third Reich came to power. His father was conscripted into the German army and was taken prisoner by the Soviets. He spent the duration of the war in a Soviet prison camp. Eric fended off hunger and deprivation at home, spending most evenings hiding in a cellar during the bombings of Stuttgart. Eric remembers waiting in the Rhine at this time and being shot at by a fighter pilot whose bullets only missed him by inches. He was also forced to assist the German army at the age of 15 at the end of the war with digging trench lines to slow down the advancing Soviet forces and witnessed the murder of several civilians. After the war was over, because Eric was an American citizen, he was invited to work in a denazification office on a U.S. military base. While on base, he was exposed to abundant food and recalls stealing food to take home and gorging on it because he was so hungry. Sound like a certain caterpillar who was always hungry? Eric Carle reports that his happy and bright picture books are a response to his bleak childhood. His stories are happy and carefree in a way that he wishes his childhood had been. I shared this story with my high schoolers this year and told them that we never know what is going on behind the surface a person presents to the world, and that we need to be kind to all. Kindness, I shared, goes a long way towards helping someone on their journey and towards easing their pain. Appended on this slide is a Newsweek article where the biographical information about Eric Carle that I just shared with you is included. I hope you'll take the time to read it if you're not familiar with his story. I hope I have helped you to see today that storytelling is so important. Book talking, book speed dating, first lines, and picture books, they're all an extension of the storytelling experience. They are all a part of helping kids forge a connection with stories in different ways. It is not enough to simply teach children to read. We have to give them something worth reading, something that will stretch their imaginations, something that will help them make sense of their own lives and encourage them to reach out towards people whose lives are quite different from their own. This is a quote from the author, children's author, Katherine Paterson. What we're here to do as librarians is to help kids connect with stories so that they can grow and develop into the people that they are supposed to be. All of these activities I've shared with you today will also help you create a community of readers that value books and stories. What I'd love to know right now is what you're reading right now. What's your favorite book of all times, or even just recently? What books do you think your fellow librarians should know about? What appeals to students in your district? In order to hear your thoughts and book suggestions, I've created a Padlet, and I'd love for you to add a post or two describing a book that you think is an interesting read for adults or kids. One maybe you would like other educators to know about. So go to the Padlet link in my Google Slides presentation and add a post. I'll just open it up right here so you can see it. If you log into Padlet first, your name will be associated with your post. If you just post a Post-it by clicking on this plus sign down here, which you can do, your Post-it will appear as anonymous. So right now I'm appearing as anonymous because I'm not logged in. If that's the case for you and you don't want to log in, just add your name to the text of your post so we know who you are. If you log in and go into login up here and go into your login, your post will show up with your name. Thank you for your attention today. I enjoyed our time together. I'm just sorry we're not able to meet in person, but I hope you all are well, and I look forward to meeting you virtually on the Padlet. Until we meet again, keep reading.